Received pronunciation, the King's English, BBC English, Standard British English. It's had lots of names, but what is it and why does it exist? Welcome to episode 7 of my History of English series, Talking Proper. If you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button, and if you haven't done so already, please click the subscribe button as well. Okay, let's get started. The term received pronunciation was first coined in the 1890s, when this type of pronunciation was chosen as a model to be used in schools. This was part of a series of educational reforms that were being implemented at the time. There is a story that this form of pronunciation was actually chosen by vote, and RP, received pronunciation, only won by 2 votes. But what is received pronunciation? Why was it chosen? First of all, received pronunciation isn't just one accent, but a family of accents that has changed over the centuries. Maybe this is a good moment to clearly define what we mean by language, dialect, and accent. Accent is easy. It's the way you pronounce words, and this pronunciation might vary from one part of the country to the other, or one part of the world to the other. A dialect is just a variety of a language, in which some words might be different, or some expressions might be different. A very simple example would be the differences in vocabulary between received pronunciation forms and other dialects. Let's take the Black Country dialect that my grandparents spoke. The Black Country is an industrial area to the west of Birmingham, and was one of the cradles of the early Industrial Revolution. Indeed, one of the places where the modern world was invented. Let's take this object. In standard English, it's called a funnel, but in Black Country dialect, it's called a tundish. Or how about the response to this question? What was the film like? Great, might be the RP, received pronunciation response, whereas in Black Country dialect, it might be Boston. So, a great funnel, in fact, would be a Boston tundish. Personally, I've never seen a funnel that could be described as great, or a tundish that could be described as Boston. But there's always hope. Why should one dialect come to dominate a country's language? Why should one language come to dominate the world? One thing is clear. This has nothing to do with the innate quality of any language or dialect. In reality, it's all about money and power. One definition that I've heard, which I actually quite like, is that the difference between a language and a dialect is that a language has a government, a central bank, and armed forces, whereas a dialect doesn't. If you look at any language that has come to dominate the world, or a large part of it, you will see that it was military and economic power at the beginning that were the main driving forces, and no inherent quality of the language that we can find. These examples, for example, of Latin or Arabic, and many others, of course, underline this. And of course, this was exactly the same with English as well. Let's go back to one of the earliest attempts at standardization. In episode 5, we saw how William Caxton introduced the printing press into England, and he chose a form of English called King's English. By the 1700s, there was a consensus that one of the accents used in the southeast of England would be considered the correct form by most people. The reason for this was obviously because that was where the capital was located, and consequently that's where the power was located. Towards the end of the 18th century, the accent used there by the upper classes had become the pronunciation to imitate in order to appear cultured. This was the period of the agricultural and early industrial revolution, as well as the period of expanding empire. As a result of all of this, it was also a period of greater social mobility, and this meant that the expanding and ambitious middle class wanted to speak in a way that wouldn't be looked down on or perceived as inferior by those from higher classes. People who wanted to get on in life often took lessons in correct pronunciation, known as elocution lessons. This became big business as elocution teaching expanded to meet the growing demand. For this reason, the term received came into use gradually. The kind of pronunciation that was socially accepted was passed down from the higher orders. It was received. So received pronunciation evolved partly consciously and partly unconsciously as an attempt by upper and later middle class people to distinguish themselves from those of lower classes. If people from the poorer parts of East London, known as Cockneys, dropped their H's in a word like appy, then anyone wanting to be thought of as cultured would not do so and would say happy. If people from the southwest of English pronounced the R after a vowel like in cat, then cultured speakers would not do so. If people from the north or the Midlands said glass with a short A, then cultured speakers would make a long glass. As northerners and Midlanders pronounced cup as cup, those who wanted to seem of a higher class would pronounce it as cup. As this new accent evolved, it became the voice of English all over the world. It was preferred pronunciation in public schools, which of course in English were private and very expensive. And the product of those schools, the missionaries, the diplomats, the civil servants, military people, admirals, and so on, took this accent around the globe during the formation of the British Empire. As I said, in the late 19th century, enormous reforms in education were being introduced, which basically made education for all British citizens compulsory until the age of 14. When they needed to decide which accent should be chosen for standard English, they chose this middle-class southern accent, which then came to be referred to officially as received pronunciation. Received pronunciation went from strength to strength, and after these reforms, it became a necessity for people to get on in life. Or maybe it would be more accurate to say that if you did not speak with something like received pronunciation, your ambitions would be harder to achieve. However, the received pronunciation of today, which you will see in the dictionaries, is not the same as the received pronunciation of, say, 80 years ago. I will leave some examples below, some links to some examples so you can hear for yourself. If you listen to a radio broadcast from the 1950s or the 1930s, it's clearly different from the received pronunciation of today. Even when I was young, the vast majority of newsreaders on television or radio very definitely spoke with a marked received pronunciation accent. Why is received pronunciation no longer as important as it used to be? It is still used as pronunciation reference in British dictionaries, but most statistics seem to indicate that fewer than 3% of the population now speak with a marked or strong received RP accent, and this percentage is falling all the time. One of the most important motors of change was greater access to people from all social backgrounds to education, especially higher education. This changed the image of received pronunciation. Before this time, RP, received pronunciation, was associated in the minds of many people, maybe the majority, as the accent of culture. With the increase in the number of people with their own regional accents entering the educational system and achieving success, received pronunciation began to get more of an image of the accent of privilege. While pure received pronunciation is relatively rare, and declining, as I said, it is still a point of reference, and many of us keep our own accents, but in a sense, RP is the kind of accent where all other accents meet. The fact that received pronunciation could rise to such heights and then decline without anybody making a decision is probably at least partly due to the fact that English does not have a language academy. And to understand why this is, we need to go back to the English Revolution of 1688, which is one of the most underrated revolutions in history, probably because it didn't kill enough people. So that will be the subject of the next episode, Who's in Charge? Bye for now.